Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. I do love a bit of small business chat, listener, and I'm sure you do too, as you're here, ready to hear a story of someone just like you in the thick of building a business you love. Something on my mind at the moment, well, actually, it's more of a question I'm turning over in my head. How do you know when a business idea is actually worth pursuing? And what does worth pursuing even really mean? When you've got something on paper that looks pretty interesting and the energy to make it real, what's the thing that makes you jump into it? And all business ventures come at a cost financially and most certainly time-wise. I know I have a million ideas that I want to explore, and sometimes just choosing one and going for it for as long as it feels right comes with months of turning it over again and again in your head. Then again, sometimes we just go for it and figure out the rest later. I'm here for it and I'm channeling that energy right now. And so it's perfect timing that I got to have and share this chat today. My guest is the fabulous Rachel Gerds, and in the sharing of her business story, we chat about basing your business idea on the lifestyle you want to have, leaning into the rug being pulled out from under you so that you can evolve and lean into what's next, the real difference between an intense corporate career and building your own thing. I really enjoyed this portion of our chat. Standing back to take a look at how far you've come and the absolute magic in business DIY. This little synopsis here literally just scratches the surface of amazing topics that we get to cover in this podcast today. So I know you'll love this story. Let's get into the chat. I'm here with Rachel Gerds, co-creator of Mountain Path Meadows, a 12-acre eco-estate, premier accommodation and wedding venue at the base of dormant volcano crater Mount Shank in the heart of South Australia's stunning limestone coast. If you can imagine for a moment standing within a beautifully designed dome, with its king-size bed and linen sheets, surrounded by tall trees and the glow of the night sky, which you can see perfectly through the clear top and sides of your home for the night. Honestly, is there anything more romantic than that? Rachel and her partner, Dan, have built this beautiful property and accommodation experience with the values to welcome diversity in all its glorious forms, to connect with the land and consult with its traditional owners on how to best care for it, and to think long-term when it comes to sustainability in land and tourism for the region. Featured in Glam Adelaide, Australian Architecture Escape, and by South Australian Tourism, I cannot wait to hear your story, Rachel. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you, Kim. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And I could easily talk about my home state, South Australia, all day long. So we will get right into that. But before we do, how would your partner, Dan, describe you?
Oh, man. How would Dan describe me? I think we'd probably start with traveled, since Dan and I met on a Kentucky trip. Pretty well traveled. We're, let's see, funny. Definitely, I think I like a laugh and like to make other people laugh. So hopefully Dan would hit that one. Hopefully a supportive and helpful partner, and definitely a partner in all the different senses of the word, because Dan and I have definitely been that for each other in the way that we've built our lives. We've really been in each other's pockets since we've met, and that's been a great thing. We've been so lucky to find each other and be able to tackle not only life, but business as well together.
No mean feat. How do you think he would describe you as a business partner?
Oh, man. Let's see. Maybe a little bit differently. I think as a business partner, I probably tend to, well, Dan and I are great at dividing and conquering, as I mentioned to you earlier, but I think as business partners, I probably tend to be the vinegar to his honey, if you could use that metaphor. The old saying, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. I totally believe that one. And there are times when the honey doesn't always work. And so the vinegar has to come in. I think Dan and I complement each other really well. He tends to do a lot of the DIY physical type work, which there's plenty around our property. And then I tend to take on more of the behind the scenes, marketing, finance, all of those fun things. So yeah, we play off each other really well.
I love that you describe them as fun things. I need to remind myself of that. Sometimes I sit down and be like, oh, Christ, I have to do all of this admin. You're right. It is fun.
I definitely get more of a kick out of the marketing stuff than the finance. I'll be honest about that, but
Oh, no, I feel that. And I love that you mentioned Kentucky. I always smile when people mention Kentucky because it reminds me also how old I am. I totally missed the Kentucky opportunity because when I decided I wanted to go look at it, I realized, oh, I'm too old. There's an age limit for this. So I love that you got in there early.
I will tell you a hot tip though. I was on a Kentucky once with someone who was over the age limit. So I don't know how carefully they check the passports on that one.
I wonder if I can still get in at 38 to try and pass. We'll give that a go. Okay, so take me back a little bit, as far back as you'd like to, because I would love to hear your backstory here. Before Mountain Path Meadows, who were you?
A very different person, I think. I've gone through a lot of change. I'm sure you can tell from the accent, not from here. I'm from the state of Michigan in the United States and a little town called Kalamazoo, which everyone gets a kick out of that name of my hometown. And I went to a small liberal arts college and probably thought growing up I was going to be an attorney or something like that. But after graduating from college, had plenty of student debt to my name and didn't think law school was in the cards at the moment. So ended up heading to Chicago and Chicago was the nearest big city to where I grew up, and getting an internship there in corporate communications. I graduated college at the height of the GFC, so not an awesome time to graduate with an English degree, but ended up scoring this internship in Corp Com at a company called Commonwealth Edison, which was the electric utility in Chicago. And I know that must sound so incredibly boring, but to be honest with you, it was like the best training ground for corporate communications and especially crisis communications that you could ever get. I was a 21-year-old intern on the phone with reporters from the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times giving a statement on behalf of a company that had 4 million customers. You know what I mean? Like, just the level of opportunity that I was given by that team was unparalleled. And I remember thinking later on in my career when I was hiring interns, I was shocked at the level of responsibility they gave me at the time, to be honest with you. But they had a lot of faith in me, and that I think really set up my career. I spent a couple of years there, and then I moved on to another company in the Chicago area. It was called Harris Bank at the time, and now they're called, rebranded to BMO Harris Bank. But nonetheless, they're owned by a Canadian company. It's a big North American bank. And that's where I spent most of my corporate communications and marketing career, and had an awesome experience there. Was able to rise through the ranks in corporate communications and then moved over to marketing right when content marketing was just becoming a thing, and was able to build that practice within the bank, and then was able to expand my team so that it was not just in the US, but also expanded into the Canadian market and international markets as well. And yeah, had an awesome time, almost 10 years at BMO, and met a lot of amazing people as well. And then back in 2018, my role was very unexpectedly made redundant, and it set my life on a different course, a different trajectory. That was when I got that news, and I immediately, as anyone does when they are told they're being made redundant, I booked an international trip immediately. And that's actually where I met Dan. I just think it's probably, at the time, it was quite devastating, to be honest with you. And I think because it was so unexpected, like I felt my career was just on this up, and then all of a sudden, bam, the corporate ladder's kicked out from under you, and you're just left going, what do I do? That was such a big part of my identity. And yeah, ended up booking the trip, meeting Dan. Once I met him, we fell in love, and I thought, what's holding me back in Chicago anymore? If I don't have a job grounding me there, so why not move to Australia and give this a go? If not now, never. And here we are a few years later. We ended up moving to Brisbane, and then I worked there also in a corporate role for about a year. Then we had the grand plans to travel during 2020. We thought that was going to be our big year. And we all know how that one turned out. We got about 6 weeks into our road trip through the US, which was like going to be the first leg of this big around the world trip. And then COVID hit, and we thought, oh shit, we probably don't want to ride out this pandemic in the US where we don't have health insurance and God forbid one of us gets sick. So we said, we're going to hop on a plane back to Australia. And it was a bit challenging at first getting back here because we felt like our lives were on hold. We had sold everything. We had quit our jobs. We were ready to travel. And then we came back and felt we were just in limbo for a long time. And so we ended up coming to South Australia on a visit. Dan's birth mom lives on the Fleurieu. And so we went to visit her, spent a bit of time with her. And at the time I was pregnant, and Dan reckons that he had Couvaid syndrome, which is sympathy pregnancy, which I will only say we never received an official diagnosis. But I mentioned that because he had insomnia for a long time while I was pregnant. And the thing that he would do during his insomnia is look at real estate listings. And so one night he ended up finding the property we live at now. And Dan's pretty quick to fall in love. And I think he probably would have bought sight unseen, but it took me a little bit more convincing. And we ended up coming to visit and take a look. And yeah, just absolutely fell in love. It's a magical place out here. And we've really been trying to, sorry, I'm looking out the window as I was saying that. We've been trying to bring to life this idea of having the accommodations and wedding venue on site. And it's really been inspired by the TV show Escape to the Chateau. I don't know if you've seen it. Shameless plug. We love it. Obviously, we've based our whole business on it. But yeah, we ended up watching that show one rainy Easter weekend in 2019 when we were stuck in our apartment in Brisbane. And we thought, man, that is a pretty cool way to build a life, to be able to have the balance of working and living on the same property and being able to grow the food you eat out your back door and take things slow and a longer sort of time scale than other people might normally think about, and enjoy living your time and spending time with family and friends and doing the things you love. So that's really been the kind of core motivation for starting the business is how can we create a life where, yes, we can make a living, of course. We all know we have to be able to bring money in the door in this society in order to live. But then that's not what it's all about. So how can we also make sure that we're constructing our lives in a way that it's not all about business and we're not stuck on conference calls at all hours of the day, and we're not missing our daughter's sporting events for work, et cetera, et cetera. We're still working that out. Everyone is, but that's the goal.
That's such a brilliant goal. I actually felt like I breathed out a little bit when you talked about going slow and being in nature. I was like, oh, take a breath. That's it's almost contagious in that sense of creating a life that allows you to live a little bit more. And I know that is always an ongoing battle with your own business, because then you also have the side of it where you're like, I have 75 thoughts all happening at the same time and little things that I need to action. So I think the journey is very understandable in that sense. I really love how you described the corporate ladder being kicked out from underneath you with your role at BMO being made redundant, and then going into COVID. I mean, I think COVID was such a ladder kick for so many of us in so many different ways about, no, don't, whatever you're doing, stop. This is now a new direction that you have to go in. And bringing it back to that identity, that sense of a corporate identity that we often get when we work for others. And even sometimes the identity we end up giving ourselves by proxy of whatever we're doing for ourselves in business. And I think it's really interesting just to identify that sense of identity, of aligning to what we do, finding ways to get back to that actually, what is it I love about what I'm doing? And how do I then build that into my own business? I just think that's got my brain ticking about identity and how we relinquish some of that so we can just create whatever it is that we want to create and just get out of our own way. Was that a bit of an undoing for you? And is it still an undoing?
Yeah, it is. And I don't know, part of me wonders if it's maybe stronger in the American culture as well. I find that when you meet someone in America, I don't know if I've noticed if it's different here in Australia, but in America, I feel like the first thing you say is, "What do you do?" Meaning, what is your job? How do you make money? And I just think it's such an interesting, yeah, commentary on the culture. That's the thing that we focus on first and foremost. And a bit sad probably at the end of the day. There is so much more to life. And yeah, it definitely was one of those things that I look back and wonder, I probably would still be in Chicago doing the same work today if I hadn't had that push. So at the time, while it was painful, it was a great kick. It was.
Yeah, I can imagine. What was the property like when you purchased it? Were you able to live there yourselves? And what was the process of building? Take me through that experience.
It was completely overgrown. Part of the property is this historic cottage, which we've been told was built in 1866. I'm sitting in it right now, but when we first moved here, it was definitely not habitable. There was a possum who had taken up residence just in the next room. He still sometimes climbs over the roof every now and then. But yes, it was totally overgrown. We didn't have a ride-on mower at the time because I thought in my infinite wisdom we didn't need one with 12 acres. You can have a laugh about that later. But actually, I had to put up a post on Facebook, the community group, asking if anyone knew anyone who could slash our yard. We were coming into summer and it's fire danger season, and we wanted to do what we could to take care of it. And that's actually how we met some of our best friends in the area. Our friend Manette responded to that and ended up sending over a neighbor who drove over on his ride on and ended up mowing our lawn on the spot. We've had these little like interactions where you get the feeling of what it's like to live in the country and live in a rural area. You know what I mean? It's totally different because I lived for 10 years in Chicago and I met one of my neighbors the entire time. Yeah, it's been such an interesting experience moving here and getting the property in shape. It's constantly changing. And because we work on that long time scale, we have to remind ourselves every now and then to just take a pause and stand back and look and go, oh, we put the car park in. That wasn't there 2 months ago. Or we planted that row of screening trees and that wasn't there 6 months ago. And it's hard to remember sometimes when you're in the middle of it that you are making progress. It's just sometimes you're not able to see the forest for the trees.
Except you can see the forest and the trees. Couldn't help that one.
Exactly.
So, making this incredible property and this vision you have for this very special accommodation experience into a business, what were some of the first steps you took in creating this vision and making it real?
One of the first steps was figuring out what type of accommodation we wanted to offer. And that really entailed reaching out to the company that ended up building our domes for us, which is based just over the border in Ballarat. And I say that was the first step because I think it was really important for us to have a differentiator when it came to marketing our accommodations business. We did have time to be able to look at the market and say, what else is out there? There are heaps of tiny houses out there on the market right now that you can stay in. How can we be that little bit different and set ourselves apart? And so being able to get hooked up with the dome builder and build this geodesic dome, which you can't stay in another timber geodesic dome in the state of Australia that we know of so far. So to be able to hang our hats on that is great for marketing and just great to let people know that it is that exclusive experience. But gosh, Kim, you say first step, but there are like a million first steps. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I'm curious in then stepping into the industry that's centered around, and I know that's elopement, so it's a little bit different, but around weddings and what an emotionally charged experience any kind of wedding can be. How has that been for you stepping into this industry and learning how to navigate it from a business sense?
That's a great question. And I'd say I'm definitely in the very early stages of figuring that one out. We've booked a few wedding clients. We are yet to host our first wedding. So that's coming up this November, actually. Our first wedding is on the books. But yes, we're stoked about that. We can't wait. I know what you mean, though, in terms of it's such a high stakes sort of time in people's lives. And I guess right now, not having been through one, we're just feeling really grateful that our business puts us in the position of being able to be a part of, what a lot of people would say is the best day of their lives. You know what I mean? Between that and then hosting people for holidays, we get to make a really positive impact on people's lives. So we're really grateful for that. And I think there will be those high stakes, high stress moments. We're hoping because we're a rustic outdoor venue, we do lean towards that elopement sort of crowd, that we attract people who are looking for a more chill, for lack of a better word, type of experience when it comes to their wedding. But at the same time, of course, we want to make everything perfect. It's their big day, their big weekend. And yeah, it remains to be seen.
I'm excited for you. That's going to be such a fun experience. I'm curious about what it was like to go from running teams on content marketing, on digital and social, and all of those crazy things that come in to play with building audience and marketing a business. What was it like going from running teams doing that to doing it for yourself and for your own business?
That's a great question. And it's absolutely been a change. I think the biggest difference for me from a marketing perspective is probably the freedom I have. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's all on you, but then it's all up to you as well. You know what I mean? Like in the corporate arena, I would have to convince people, a lot of people, that an idea was good enough and worthy of investment. Whereas now I can have an idea pop in my head and then go and execute it that same afternoon if I so choose. So that's a great freedom, especially for someone who has a bit of creativity in them, to be able to let that out. I think that there's a lot of fun there. Now, I will say that I definitely miss being able to pick the brains of many experts who were either on my team or were my colleagues. That's probably the thing I miss the most, is just that like knowledge base. Now, having said that, I still keep in touch with lots of incredibly smart people who are willing to let me bend their ears. But yeah, it's a totally different ball game going from corporate to running your own business.
As someone who has a content marketing background and now having to do my own content marketing, I feel very kindred spirit with you. Do you find sometimes that you just get really stuck in between this rock and a hard place of like having great ideas and knowing what you need to do, and then also just generally not doing it because you feel like you need to have some sort of like broad plan to stick to? Like I often feel, what are my content pillars? What days of the week am I posting certain things? And so I do this loop in my head around what I know I'm supposed to have for my brand, like this plan, and then I can execute on the plan, and not having time to do the plan and not having time to execute anything. So just it being a mess. That's a big overshare. Is that something you can relate to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the saying, what is it? The cobbler's children have no shoes. That could probably be said about some of my work as well. Just how I would advise a client might be differently from how I'm running my own things. But yeah, it is one of those things where it can fall to the back burner at times, but it's there.
I feel that greatly. I'm just constantly beating myself up about marketing and PR, and like between that and creating a product, it's just, oh, for goodness sakes, who's going to win today? So that's quite comforting. As you've been moving through this process of creating your business, what has surprised you the most?
This is going to sound so silly probably, but it has surprised me how challenging it is to be an entrepreneur. I don't think I probably never thought about it deeply before when I was in the corporate world. And probably the closest I got to thinking about it was like running a small business banking campaign to try and win some small business customers. But yeah, I think it it makes sense. It is definitely the easier route, in my opinion, to go get a job, go work for somebody else, bring in your paycheck, and work your 9 to 5. That is so the easier option now that I've been on the other side. Now, I'm not saying that I want to go back to that, but in terms of like intellectual ease, simple. Whereas when you're running your own business, again, everything is up to you, whether or not you're an expert in name the topic. Yeah, pros and cons with that. But yeah, it can definitely be challenging. I think that's the thing that has surprised me the most. And yeah, and I just think it explains why people don't do it. You know what I mean? Why it can be pretty rare to find successful entrepreneurs who are doing that as their full-time gig. There's a lot of like side hustle scenarios, but yeah, hats off to everyone out there who has had an idea in their heads and then brought it to life. That is, now that I've had some experience being an entrepreneur, I think that is the coolest thing to think of something was just a kernel of an idea in your head and now it's actually real out there, I think is so cool.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think back to the me who was sitting in a job, and this is absolutely no shade on any corporate job or anything because, geez, they're hard. But I remember sitting in my hard job that I would do 60, 70 hours a week. It would stress me out to no end. And it had so much personal growth in it, all these things, right? And it was hard. And the me in that moment was like, oh my God, this is so hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. Now, in retrospect, I look at that and go, oh, I was horribly wrong. Yes, it was hard, but it is nothing compared to this. And it is so difficult to explain because those of us who have had the experience of both can look at that and understand now, but it's so linked with your personal sense of what you're capable of and your personal blocks and all the things you don't know and just you get into systems once you know something in a job and things know who to speak to about is something you need to in a corporate hierarchy and you know the sort of structure you need to follow, like very loosely. There's certainly problem solving, but just moving from one accounting software to another requires so many hours of thinking and learning and creating these new pathways to get through to something. And that's just a small example, right through to major decisions and every social post and anyone you engage in a professional sense, anyone you pay to help you with things, like every single decision is so hard and is such a big ladder to climb that I absolutely feel you. Like I often romanticize now. I'm like, what would life be like if I just went, knowing what I know now, what would life be like if I just went back to a corporate career? Like, I'd be like, this is cool. Like water off, ducks back. Like this will be hard and time consuming and not easy by any stretch, but comparably, with the perspective that it's not everything and it could be a lot worse, I'd be cruising through it. But there is also then that side of it, that the leaning into creating a business and, like you say, taking a kernel and making it an incredible idea, that sense of self-satisfaction at any stage of success, even just seeing it be real before it's huge and big and all of those things, seeing it be real is, you can't turn away from that. Do you feel like you could ever go back to working for someone else now that you've taken this dip?
I think it would be hard. I think I'd be much stronger about making it on my terms. And yeah, I should say, like you said, no shade at all to anyone in the corporate world. I was there for 10 years. But part of me says that too, because I think the world is created for people who have normal jobs, if that makes sense. Even like Centerlink and things like that just aren't structured to reflect the life of an entrepreneur. And so you find that everything is just a bit more difficult. That's more what I mean when I say like the level of difficulty, as opposed to, I'm not trying to shit all over anyone who has a corporate job.
No, and likewise, but also it's really hard on the other side. But I agree with you thinking about going for a bank loan, for a mortgage, renting and filling out a rental application and proving income. And anything like that all of a sudden becomes so much more difficult. Fitting things into time zones or times of the day, needing to be structured around this concept of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And that's just not how things work. And yeah, so I hear you. I just think that's exactly why this podcast exists. It brings together us community of business builders who are just like, in the whirlwind of what is going on. And this is the best thing I've ever done. And oh my God, I'm so terrified. How do I get through this? Because yeah, it's all of that undoing and those things that you don't think about. And you often don't see or hear about when someone's already gotten to that level of quote unquote founder of these huge businesses. I'm thinking the likes of Canva and Who Gives a Crap, and these incredible businesses that are like at this level. But it's no, that's one thing. Everything is hard. Like everything is hard. So I think it's an incredible point to raise on there. I want to get back to a beautiful moment in business that I love to reflect on as often as I can, because like I say, there are so many rings to the ladder before you get to whatever your picture of success looks like in business. And the first one always comes with your first customer. I'd love to hear your experience of finding your first customer. What was that like?
It's so funny you say that because I can absolutely remember the whole experience. So it was funny when we first put our listing live on Airbnb, we click publish and we're expecting, all right, where are the bookings? And it was probably a week before we got our first booking, and it was the most torturous week we've ever had, thinking, where is everyone? So finally got our first booking, and it was a couple weeks later when they arrived, and just the most lovely couple you've ever met. I think one was American and one was Irish. And part of our experience here is we personally welcome every single guest. We meet them in the car park. We walk them back to the domes and give them a bit of a tour while they're here, just so they know what to expect, how to get to places. It's a great time to get to know people and give them recommendations as well. And I remember Dan was taking part in a bird watching course the evening. Normally he would be the check-in master. As I mentioned, he's the honey guy. He's great with people. He can have a conversation with a brick wall, and he would have been great at check-in, but check-in was left to me this night because Dan wasn't there. And I thought I had my little checklist of everything I had to tell them. And I forgot to tell them to zip down the entrance of the dome at night because it gets cold. And we looked up at about 10 o'clock at night and it was still up, and they probably had a very cold night. And I felt so awful. But like I said, they were the loveliest couple, and thank goodness we had an amazing first guest because they were great sports about it, and they left us the most gorgeous note afterwards and gave us a bit of feedback, a few tips and thoughts. They really thought about some suggestions that would make it better, a bunch of which we took. Yeah, we were just so grateful that we had that experience as our first guest. And I would say 90% of our guests have been just as amazing. Like the general population, there's one every now and then that maybe it's not the experience for them. But yeah, we've really lucked out, especially that first time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I love how you frame that. I think about that a lot I think I've had one really bad review of this podcast. It was like a 1 star. And I was like, I can't stop thinking about that. Why did you hate me? Look, it was probably a disgruntled person from the past, who knows, or an accident. But I agree with you. It's a scary experience putting yourself out there, but most people are wonderful. And if they're going to give you feedback, that feedback is going to help you to grow. And it's about embracing that. So I'm happy for you that you had that experience as well. We touched on before, we talked a little bit about bank loans and the pressure, all of those things around that. And finances is something that's really probably one of the biggest challenges we go through with creating a small business, is figuring out how to make ends meet and how to get through that period, what to outsource, what to do yourself. How have you managed your finances through this period? Has it been a full-on experience?
It has been full on. I guess with a fine tooth comb is the best I can say. Yeah, we've been doing our best to DIY as much as we can and I say the DIY in all senses of the word, whether that's actually building something or DIY a marketing campaign or creating the logo or whatever it is. We've really had to get creative and do things ourselves. But I don't know, that's where sometimes the magic can happen, to be able to be in those sticky situations where you have certain constraints, whether it's financial or time or otherwise, and try and figure out a solution. I think I don't want to I don't want to say I love being in that position, Of course, I'd love to have oodles of money, and finances aren't an issue at all. But I do think there's something to be said for the creativity that sort of is generated in those situations, because you have no other choice than to get creative, think outside the box, and figure out some other solution. And that's been fun for us. Yeah, Dan has learned a heap of new skills. We've made friends with a local gentleman who Dan met down at Men's Shed, who has been like a surrogate grandfather and just the most beautiful human being. So I think that's probably another point I would say, is when you're in those tough situations of the time constraints, the money constraints. Another constraint for us is being in an area where we don't have family and we have a child. To be able to be really on our own and balance all of that can be a challenge, but it also brings really beautiful moments, like meeting people who you would never otherwise meet and being put in the position of asking for help, which is not something I'm terribly good at or have ever been terribly good at. Not to sound corny, but some really beautiful moments have come out of it.
Yeah, I like the way you compare that, is you have to get scrappy in sometimes when you're doing things yourself. So, yeah, and it can be annoying, but also incredible growth opportunities. I can agree with that. Have you maintained any work outside of the business to help you through this process?
I've done a bit of consulting, definitely a side hustle. Again, one of those cobbler's children have no shoes moments. I'm probably not promoting my consulting business very well, but yeah, I've done a bit of marketing consulting on the side. Had a great project about a year back where I worked on a digital marketing boot camp that was being ported over from the US over to Australia. So they needed someone to Australianize the content. So that was super fun to be able to, all of this silly knowledge I have about the differences between Australia and the US actually came in handy for that job. But yes, have done a bit of consulting, some content marketing work, a bit of branding work on the side. And that's good for me too, because I think it just keeps those muscles fresh and make sure that I'm still keeping up on what the trends are and what new things are happening in the marketing space, because Lord knows there's always something new.
Oh, isn't that the case for all of us who went threads crazy not too long ago? There's always something new to learn. So, yeah, I agree. I think having that approach and that flexible approach to your business is everything. And if you need to, or if the opportunity is there, if it's something you'd like to do, bringing in consulting or projects or part-time work, I think it's all about balance and whatever works for you. And it can bring you a lot. That's really, yeah, that's good to hear. What do you hope to achieve with your business over the coming years?
I guess to sum it up, I'd hope to achieve what I mentioned at the start, which is creating that life where our family is able to deliver beautiful, positive experiences for our clients and guests in a way that allows us to live slowly, live comfortably, and enjoy our time together. I think that's what it all boils down to.
How can the listener and I support you to get there?
Book a stay. Yeah, come see us. We're available on Airbnb, and definitely always open to the weddings and elopements inquiries as well. Of course, I'm biased, but it's a pretty magical spot back there by the volcano, and we can't wait to host more couples.
Amazing. I think I'll be booking myself a trip there very soon. If I could work out if I could work out some way to make some sort of unemployed and afraid mini conference, like maybe we can all come along with you and enjoy the experience. Rachel, like, hearing your story has been such a gift today, and hearing about how you're going about creating a life that you love and a business that you love. It is just so awesome to hear, and I've loved every minute of it. Thank you so much for sharing your experience of building your business with me today, and for the listener as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. It's been really fun, Kim.
One quick thing. If you're hearing this, you've listened all the way through. Hopefully that means you really like this podcast, because it's pretty generous to give up 40 odd minutes of your time for it. If that is the case, please leave the show a star rating and a review. It helps me reach so many more people who might also listen all the way through and get some benefit and some support out of it. Not to mention, it puts a real spring in my step to read them. Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the podcast for small business builders with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review. And of course, join the community on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid wherever you're hanging out, and I'll see you there.